One morning in the small town of Ridgemont, Virginia, Quentin Hadley seized an older black man by the back of his jacket and dragged him off the stool at the diner counter. "Get off that stool, dog," he growled. The bustling diner fell into an abrupt silence as every fork paused mid-bite. Harlan Brooks gripped the counter's edge and met Quentin's stare without flinching. "I've been eating here longer than you've been alive, son." Quentin leaned in closer, his face twisted with arrogance. "You talk back to me? My daddy's the chief of police. I say animals eat outside." He grabbed Harlan's collar with both hands and hauled him across the tile floor. Chairs scraped loudly, plates clattered and shattered. A dozen patrons watched in frozen horror, but not a single one spoke up or stepped in. Quentin hurled him onto the sidewalk and laughed cruelly. What Quentin didn't realize, what made him the most foolish man in town that day, was exactly who he had just laid hands on. To truly understand the weight of that moment, one has to know who Harlan Brooks really was. Because no one in that diner had the slightest clue. Ridgemont was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your business, and even what you'd had for dinner the night before. The main street still boasted those charming old red brick storefronts from decades past. There was a barber shop with a spinning pole, a hardware store filled with the scent of sawdust and motor oil, and a post office where the clerk remembered every customer's birthday. Not long before, the town had voted to remove the Confederate statue from the square. The meetings had been heated, with grown men shouting at one another. In the end, the statue came down, but the empty stone pedestal remained, as if the community couldn't yet decide what it stood for. Right in the heart of Main Street stood Clara Benson's country kitchen. Clara Benson had owned the diner for more than 2 decades. She was a black woman in her middle years, with strong arms shaped by years of handling heavy cast-iron skillets, and a voice that could command a room with the softest whisper. Checkered curtains hung in the windows, and a brass bell above the door chimed welcomingly with every arrival. The inviting aroma of bacon grease and fresh biscuits greeted you before you even stepped inside. The regulars had their own seats, their own mugs, and their own unspoken rules. No one had been coming to Clara's longer than Harlan Brooks. Every weekend morning at his usual time, that bell would ring and Harlan would walk in. He'd been following the same routine for many years. He would hang his canvas jacket on the 3rd hook by the door. His hook, as everyone knew. Clara always had his coffee ready before he sat down. Black, no sugar, in a ceramic mug with a small chip on the handle that she refused to replace. "Morning, Harlan." "Morning, Clara." That simple exchange was all they needed. Harlan was in his early 60s, tall and lean, the kind of lean forged from decades of discipline rather than any diet. A faded scar traced along his left forearm. His hands were rough yet steady. Every time the front door opened, his eyes would flick toward it for just a moment, a quick, instinctive scan, before returning to his newspaper. He sat with perfect posture, not rigid but straight, as if his spine had long forgotten how to slouch. He wore no medals, no pins, no hat bearing a military emblem. Nothing that revealed who he was or what he had accomplished. To anyone who walked in that morning, he was simply an older man enjoying his coffee and reading the news, and that was precisely how Harlan preferred it. On the other side of Ridgemont, the name Hadley carried significant weight. Victor Hadley had led the Ridgemont Police Department for many years. He was the sort of man who shook hands warmly at church on Sundays and quietly buried complaints on Mondays. His son, Quentin, was in his late 20s. Though technically a deputy in the neighboring county, in Ridgemont, Quentin carried himself as if he wore his father's badge. He was loud, entitled, and always seeking someone to remind that the Hadleys ran things. People in town spoke of Quentin the way one might talk about an approaching storm. You didn't stand in its path, you simply got out of the way. Black residents knew him all too well. Quentin had a habit of appearing where he wasn't needed. Traffic stops that dragged on for extended periods, noise complaints filed against homes that were perfectly quiet. Always the same neighborhoods, Always the same faces, and nothing ever came of those complaints, because every piece of paper, with Quentin's name on it, ended up on his father's desk. Victor Hadley had a particular talent for making such papers vanish. That morning, the brass bell above the diner's door jingled once more. Quentin Hadley walked in accompanied by Deputy Shane Porter. Shane was on duty, dressed in his full uniform with badge, belt, and sidearm. Quentin was off duty, wearing jeans and boots with wraparound sunglasses pushed up on his head. Yet he entered as if he owned the place. They took a booth near the window. Quentin ordered loudly enough for the entire diner to hear, and Shane laughed at every remark he made. Then, Quentin noticed Harlan at the counter. His expression changed gradually. It began with a narrowing of the eyes, then his jaw tightened, and finally that unmistakable look, the one that said someone in the room didn't belong. Clara saw it too. Her grip tightened on the coffee pot handle. The regulars noticed as well. A few suddenly became fascinated with their eggs. The atmosphere in the diner shifted palpably. You could feel the tension building, like the calm before a storm. It began as it always did with Quentin, not with a blow or a shout, but with a voice just loud enough for the intended person to hear. "You know what's wrong with this town, Shane?" Quentin leaned back in the booth, arms draped across the back of the seat. He wasn't looking at Shane. His eyes were fixed on Harlan. "It used to be you'd walk in here and know everybody. Now there are all sorts of people showing up, sitting wherever they please, acting like they own the place." Shane Porter chuckled. He was a young deputy with a buzz cut and thick neck, the kind who laughed at whatever the loudest voice in the room said. He glanced at Harlan, then back at Quentin. He knew exactly who Quentin was talking about. Harlan didn't look up. He turned the page of his newspaper and took a slow sip of coffee. The mug felt warm in his palm. The bacon on his plate continued to sizzle. He heard every word Quentin said, but he chose to respond to none of it. Clara stood behind the counter, wiping the same spot over and over. Her jaw was clenched tight. Her eyes darted between Quentin and Harlan, as if watching a fuse burning toward dynamite. Quentin waited, craving a reaction. A flinch, a glance, anything. He received nothing, so he stood up. The booth creaked under him. His boots echoed on the tile floor as he took 3, 4, 5 steps. He stopped right beside Harlan's stool, close enough that Harlan could smell the cheap cologne and the cigarette Quentin had smoked in the parking lot. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Harlan set his coffee down slowly. He folded the newspaper and placed it on the counter. Then he looked up at Quentin. "I heard you just fine." "Yeah? Then why are you ignoring me?" "Because there's nothing you've said that's worth responding to." The diner went utterly quiet. Not the comfortable silence of a lazy morning, but the heavy, expectant quiet that falls when people sense something terrible is about to unfold right in front of their breakfast. Quentin's neck flushed red, the color creeping up from his collar to his ears. His jaw clenched. He placed both hands flat on the counter, one on either side of Harlan's plate, and leaned in close. "You know who I am." "I do." "You know who my father is." "I do." "Then you know how things work around here. So when I talk, you listen. That's how it goes." Harlan didn't lean back or forward. He simply held Quentin's stare with the calm resolve of a man who had faced far greater dangers than a bully in his late 20s. "Son, I've been coming here for many years.
Mãi đi theo những chặng đường con qua, anh chẳng ngà nhuộm tình câu hát. Hỡi người đừng vội sang ngang, bên sông còn đò.
Unshakable calm, and that calm infuriated Quentin. He turned toward Clara. "Clara, this man is making your customers uncomfortable." Clara stopped wiping. She looked Quentin straight in the eye. "The only person making anyone uncomfortable in here is you, Quentin." "Excuse me, you heard me. Harlan's been a customer here longer than you've been shaving. He's not bothering anyone. Quentin smiled, but it wasn't genuine. It was the kind of smile that precedes a threat. You know, Clara, I was talking to my dad the other day. He mentioned your health inspection is overdue. Said it'd be a shame if someone had to come out here and take a real close look at this kitchen. The words lingered in the air like smoke. Every regular in the diner understood what he truly meant. This wasn't about health codes. This was about power. Who had it, and who didn't. Clara's hand trembled, not from fear but from a deep, burning rage. For more than 2 decades, she had built this place. Every table, every recipe, every early morning. And this young man was threatening to tear it all apart because she wouldn't throw out a customer based on the color of his skin. She opened her mouth to respond, but Harlan spoke first. "That's enough." His voice was quiet but firm, the tone of a man accustomed to giving orders that were followed. "Leave her out of this. Your problem is with me. So let's keep it with me." Quentin tilted his head. "My problem. Old man, you are the problem." He snapped his fingers at Shane without turning around. "Shane, come here." Shane rose from the booth, adjusted his belt, and walked over slowly, as if wanting everyone to notice the badge and the gun. He positioned himself near the front door, not blocking it exactly, but close enough to send a clear message. Quentin was off duty, but Shane was not. An older woman in the corner booth pulled her purse closer. A young couple near the window stopped talking. A mother turned her child's face away from the counter. Everyone could feel the shift in the room's gravity. All of it was pulling toward the counter where Harlan sat. "Here's what's going to happen," Quentin said. He poked Harlan's chest with his index finger. "You're going to get up. You're going to walk out that door. And you're not going to come back. Not today, not next weekend, not ever." Harlan looked down at the finger on his chest, then back up at Quentin. "No." One word. That was all, and it landed like a grenade. Quentin's face contorted. The red flush climbed to his forehead. He grabbed Harlan's jacket at the shoulder and yanked him off the stool. The stool spun and crashed into the one beside it. Harlan's plate slid off the counter and shattered on the floor. Bacon, eggs, and ceramics scattered across the tile. Harlan caught himself on the edge of a nearby table. Glasses rattled. A woman gasped. He didn't fall. After 3 decades of military service, his body knew how to absorb impact and find balance before his mind even registered the blow. I said, "Move." Quentin grabbed him by the collar with both hands now, twisting the fabric as he dragged him toward the door. Harlan's boot scraped across the tile. He didn't fight back, not because he couldn't, but because he chose not to. There was a profound difference in that choice, and it meant everything. The brass bell above the door jingled, a cheerful sound that felt entirely out of place in that moment. Quentin shoved Harlan through the doorway. Harlan hit the sidewalk hard. His right knee struck the concrete. His palm scraped raw. The canvas jacket tore at the shoulder seam. Quentin stood in the doorway, sunlight at his back casting a shadow over his face. "Go find somewhere your kind belongs, dog." Then he turned back into the diner, grinning, and clapped Shane on the shoulder, as if they'd just won a game. Inside, the dozen patrons sat frozen, forks suspended, mouths agape, eyes wide. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. A woman near the window had her phone out, her hands shaking as the camera recorded. Outside, Harlan Brooks sat on the sidewalk of the town where he had been born. His knee bled through his khakis. His palms were raw and pink. The jacket his wife Lila had given him for their anniversary was torn at the shoulder. He didn't yell. He didn't pound the ground. He didn't call for help. He simply took a breath, then another. He pressed his hands flat against the concrete and pushed himself up, slowly, the way a man rises when he wants you to know he is choosing to stand, not because you ordered him to. Clara came running out the front door, the bell jingling behind her. She carried a damp towel in one hand and fury in her eyes. "Harlan! Harlan, are you okay? Let me see your hands." "I'm fine, Clara." "You are not fine. That boy just in my restaurant, I swear to God." "Clara." Harlan placed his hand on her arm, gentle but steady. "I'm fine." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the kind of anger that has no outlet. Harlan brushed off his knees, straightened his torn jacket, and stood there on that sidewalk, bleeding, yet carrying himself with the same dignified posture he had maintained through 3 decades of service. Inside the diner, Quentin Hadley sat down at the counter, right on Harlan's stool. He picked up what remained of Harlan's coffee and took a sip. "Clara, how about some fresh bacon over here?" Harlan walked to his truck, parked at the far end of the lot. It was a dark green Ford F-150, about 10 years old, clean but not flashy, the kind of truck a man drives when he doesn't need to draw attention. He opened the driver's side door. His hands were still raw from the concrete, with tiny beads of blood like red dew on his palms. He reached into the glove compartment for a napkin and pressed it against the scrape on his right knee. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was removing himself from the situation, the way a man with 3 decades of military training knew how. De-escalate, withdraw, don't give them what they want. But Quentin wasn't finished. The diner door swung open, the brass bell jingling. Quentin walked out with Shane 2 steps behind. Sunglasses back on, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, he moved with the slow swagger of a man who believed the whole world was his sidewalk. Hey, where do you think you're going?" Harlan didn't turn around. He folded the napkin and tucked it into his pocket. "I'm leaving. That's what you wanted." "I didn't say you could leave. I said you could leave the diner. I didn't say anything about the parking lot." Harlan turned around and looked at Quentin, then at Shane. Shane's hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to convey a message. "What do you want, Quentin?" "I want to know who you are. Show me some ID." "You're off duty. You have no authority to ask me for identification." Quentin smiled, that same smile from the diner, the one that came before the threat. "I'm off duty. Shane's not." He jerked his thumb toward the deputy. "Shane, ask the man for his ID." Shane stepped forward, cleared his throat, and tried to sound official. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification." Harlan looked at Shane for a long moment. He could have argued. He knew his rights better than either of these men ever would. But he also knew what often happened to black men who argued with badges in small-town parking lots. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his back pocket, making sure both hands remained visible. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his Virginia driver's license. Shane took it, walked back to his cruiser, and ran it through the system. Harlan stood by his truck, with his arms at his sides. The morning sun was growing warmer. A bead of sweat rolled down the side of his neck. A short while later, Shane walked back. "He's clean. No warrants, no record, nothing." Quentin's jaw tightened. He didn't like clean. Clean meant he had nothing to hold on to. Clean meant this older man was exactly what he appeared to be, a law-abiding citizen who had been minding his own business. But Quentin Hadley didn't operate on facts. He operated on feelings, and right now, his feeling was that this man had embarrassed him by refusing to be afraid. Something doesn't feel right. Quentin started walking around Harlan's truck in a slow circle, running his hand along the side panel as if inspecting livestock. "You know, Shane, I think I smell something." "Smell what?" "Marijuana, yeah, definitely, coming from this vehicle." Harlan's voice remained steady. "There is no marijuana in this truck. There has never been marijuana in this truck." "Well, I guess we'll find out." "Shane, open it up." Shane hesitated for a moment. A flicker of something, perhaps conscience, perhaps nerves, crossed his face. Then it vanished. He opened the passenger side door of Harlan's truck without consent, without a warrant, without probable cause. Harlan spoke clearly. loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I do not consent to this search. I am stating for the record that I do not consent." "Noted," Quentin said. He wasn't even looking at Harlan. He was already rummaging through the glove compartment. Registration papers, a pack of tissues, a small flashlight. He tossed each item onto the passenger seat like he was digging through a junk drawer. Shane searched the back seat, the floor mats, an old blanket, a pair of reading glasses in a case. Nothing. Then Quentin found it. Under the back seat, a locked metal case, dark brown, about the size of a shoebox. Heavy. Well, what do we have here?" Harlan's jaw tightened. For the first time that morning, something shifted in his eyes. Not fear, but something deeper, something protective. "That is my personal property. It is locked, and you have no right to open it." "Shane, get me something to pry this open." "Quentin, I don't think we should—" Did I stutter? "Open it." Shane pulled a flathead screwdriver from his cruiser's toolkit and handed it to Quentin. Quentin jammed it into the latch and twisted. The cheap lock snapped. He flipped the case open. Inside, laid out on a bed of dark velvet, were 4 items. A faded military service photograph of a young black man in dress uniform, standing tall with eyes forward. A carefully folded American flag in a triangular frame. A leather-bound journal with worn edges, and a small velvet box. Quentin picked up the velvet box and opened it. Inside sat a Bronze Star medal, its ribbon slightly faded but the medal still catching the light. He held it up between 2 fingers, as if it were a trinket from a cereal box. "The hell is this? What? You buy this at a pawn shop? Pick it up at a yard sale?" Harlan said nothing, but his steady, disciplined hands clenched into fists at his sides. Quentin tossed the medal aside. It hit the asphalt, bounced once, and rolled under the truck. "Junk." He dropped the case on the ground. The photograph slid out onto the pavement. The journal's pages fluttered in the morning breeze. "Shane, I'm not finding anything illegal, but this man clearly had an attitude problem back in the diner. I think we need to hold him here until we figure out what's going on." Shane pulled out his handcuffs and looked at Harlan. "Sir, I'm going to need you to sit down on the curb." "On what charge?" "Obstruction." "Obstruction of what?" There was no answer. Because there was no crime. There was no charge. There was nothing except 2 men with a badge and a family name, and 1 man with brown skin who had refused to be afraid. Harlan sat down on the curb. A man in his early 60s, a veteran, sitting on a concrete curb in a diner parking lot in his own hometown. His knees ached, his palms were still raw. His Bronze Star lay somewhere under his truck in the dirt. Quentin stood over him, pulled out his phone, threw an arm around Shane's shoulder, and held the phone out at arm's length. Click. A selfie, the 2 of them grinning, with Harlan on the curb behind them like a prop. Quentin looked at the photo and laughed. Classic. He didn't notice the woman inside the diner, by the window. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her phone was pressed flat against the glass, the red recording dot still blinking. He also didn't notice Clara in the back hallway, phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently. Ray, it's Clara. You need to come now. They've got Harlan in the parking lot. It's bad. It's real bad." Some time passed. Harlan sat on that curb like a man who had waited in far worse places. Deserts, foxholes, hospital corridors where the news was never good. Time was nothing to a man like him. Clara brought him a cup of coffee, walking right past Quentin and Shane without a glance. She set the mug on the curb next to Harlan and squeezed his shoulder. "Hang on, Harlan. I'm all right, Clara. I've sat in worse spots than this." She went back inside, the bell jingling behind her. Quentin was inside now, sitting at the counter eating. Not his food, but Harlan's. Clara had prepared a fresh plate of bacon and eggs for Harlan right before everything went wrong. Quentin had pulled it across the counter and was digging in as if he'd ordered it himself. "Clara, these eggs are cold. You want to heat these up for me?" Clara didn't answer. She stood at the register with her arms crossed, her eyes on the parking lot. Quentin talked with his mouth full, loud, bragging to Shane about how his dad would handle everything. Relax. Even if the old man complains, my dad'll bury it. He always does. Remember that thing last summer? Gone, like it never happened. Shane nodded, but he wasn't laughing anymore. Something about the way Harlan had sat down on that curb. Calm, quiet, as if waiting for something specific, made Shane's stomach turn. Quentin pulled out his phone and called his father. "Hey, Dad. Yeah, some guy at Clara's causing trouble. Nothing serious. I handled it. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case someone calls." He hung up and took another bite of bacon, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Then Shane looked out the window. "Quentin." "What?" "Quentin, look." A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Government plates, tinted windows. It stopped a short distance from where Harlan sat. Then a second one. Then a third. The engines idled low and heavy. The kind of sound that vibrates in your chest before you fully understand what you're seeing. Quentin stood up slowly, the fork still in his hand. The door of the lead vehicle opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, in his middle 60s, African-American, and he wore the full-dress uniform of the United States Army. Dark blue jacket, gold buttons, ribbons covering the left side of his chest like a wall of color, and on each shoulder, 4 stars. 4 silver stars on each shoulder. General Leonard Ray Pierce, Commanding General of United States Army Forces Command. 2 aides stepped out behind him. Then a military attorney in uniform. Then a driver who stayed by the vehicle with hands folded. The general didn't look at the diner. He didn't look at Quentin through the window. He didn't look at any of the faces now pressing against the glass. He walked straight to Harlan. Harlan saw him coming. He set the coffee mug down on the curb, pressed his raw palms against his knees, and pushed himself to his feet. Slowly, steadily, the same way he had risen from the sidewalk earlier, choosing to rise. General Pierce stopped a few feet in front of him. The parking lot was dead silent. No birds, no traffic. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then, General Leonard Ray Pierce, a 4-star general of the United States Army, one of the highest-ranking military officers in the country, raised his right hand to his brow. He saluted Harlan Brooks first. In the United States military, a lower-ranking person always salutes a higher-ranking officer first. Always. That's the rule. A sergeant salutes a captain. A colonel salutes a general. But there is one exception. The Medal of Honor. Any service member, regardless of rank, regardless of stars, salutes a Medal of Honor recipient first. A 4-star general, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, even the President of the United States will initiate the salute. Harlan Brooks was a retired sergeant major. After 3 decades of service, 3 combat deployments, and a Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States of America can bestow upon a human being. That medal wasn't in his case. That one was on display at the Pentagon. The Bronze Star Quentin had thrown in the dirt was just one of many. Harlan straightened his torn jacket, lifted his chin, and returned the salute. Clean, sharp, perfect, as if the 3 decades had never left his bones. Pierce dropped the salute, stepped forward, and took Harlan's hand in both of his. "Sergeant Major Brooks, I got the call. I was at Fort Belvoir, came as fast as I could." "Appreciate you coming, Ray. Didn't want to make it a thing." It was already a thing, Harlan. Inside the diner, Quentin Hadley stood at the window. The fork had fallen from his hand somewhere in the last minute. His face had gone white, not red anymore, but the kind of white that happens when every drop of blood drains from your head at once. Shane was behind him. He had taken off his sunglasses. His hand was no longer near his belt. It hung at his side, limp as if it no longer belonged to him. The woman with the phone moved to the doorway, still recording, the red dot still blinking. A dozen people who hadn't said a word now watched through the glass as a 4-star general held the hand of the man they had let get dragged across the floor. General Pierce turned around. He looked at the diner, then at the parking lot, then at Shane Porter, who stood near the entrance, like a man who had forgotten how to use his legs. "You deputy, come here!" Shane walked over, or tried to. His boots scraped the asphalt as if they weighed 50 pounds each. He stopped several feet from the general, unable to meet his eyes. "Are you aware that you just conducted an illegal search of this man's vehicle? No warrant, no probable cause, no consent." Shane opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "Are you aware that you detained this man without charge? A man who has committed no crime. A man who has served this country for 3 decades. A man who has received the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States." Shane's bottom lip trembled. He looked like a child caught stealing who had just realized his parents were standing right behind him. "Sir, Quentin said." "I didn't ask what Quentin said. I asked what you did." The general's military attorney was already on the phone, making 3 calls in rapid succession. To the county sheriff's department, the state attorney general's office, and a contact at the Pentagon's Public Affairs Division. He spoke low and fast, jotting notes in a small notebook between calls. Then Pierce looked at the diner door. "Where is he? The one who started this?" Quentin Hadley stepped outside. He didn't strut this time. He didn't swing his arms or hook his thumbs in his belt loops. He walked through that door like a man entering a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. "Sir, listen. This was a misunderstanding. I didn't know." Pierce cut him off, not with a shout, with a voice so calm it was worse than any scream. "You didn't know what? You didn't know he was a veteran. You didn't know he had a Medal of Honor. Tell me something, son. If he didn't have that medal, if he was just a man in his early 60s eating breakfast, would what you did have been acceptable then?" Quentin's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing. "That's what I thought." Clara stepped into the doorway, arms crossed, eyes red but steady. "General, I've got the security camera footage. Every second from the moment he walked in to the moment you pulled up. Audio, too." The woman with the phone raised it from behind Clara's shoulder. "I got it, too. All of it." Pierce nodded. "Good. Hold on to it. You're going to need it." Shortly thereafter, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled into the lot. Not from the Ridgemont PD. This was outside Victor Hadley's hands now. 2 deputies stepped out. They walked straight to Quentin. "Quentin Hadley, you're under arrest. Assault in the 4th degree, unlawful detention, theft of personal property, deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Quentin's face crumbled. "Theft? What theft?" "The medal you threw on the ground, sir. That's federal property and a national honor. You damaged and discarded it intentionally." They turned him around and cuffed his wrists behind his back. The click of the handcuffs echoed off the brick storefronts of Main Street. Shane Porter was placed on immediate administrative leave on the spot. His badge was taken. His service weapon was taken. His body camera had not been activated during the entire incident. Of course it hadn't, but it didn't matter. Clara's camera had caught everything. The bystander's phone had caught everything. Every word, every shove, every laugh. A short while later, Quentin sat in the back of a county cruiser. He pulled out his phone with cuffed hands and called his father. Dad, you need to come get me. They're arresting me. This is insane. Call someone." Victor Hadley made calls. He called the county sheriff. Voicemail. He called the district attorney. Voicemail. He called Judge Eleanor Shaw, who owed him a favor from years earlier. Voicemail. Nobody picked up. Not one person. The political calculations had shifted in real time. Nobody wanted their name anywhere near this story. Back in the parking lot, Harlan Brooks knelt beside his truck. He reached under the chassis and picked up his Bronze Star. He brushed the dirt off with his thumb, held it in his palm for a moment, then placed it back in the velvet box, back in the case, and closed the lid. He shook General Pierce's hand one more time, thanked Clara, got in his truck, and drove home. No speech, no celebration, no fist in the air, Just a man driving home on a morning like any other. The video hit the internet before Quentin's mugshot was even taken. The woman from the diner, Lydia Reed, a mother of two, posted the footage on every platform she had. No filter, no edit, no caption except 5 words. This happened in Ridgemont today. By that evening, it had hundreds of thousands of views. By the next day, it had surpassed 1 million, and the numbers kept climbing. The title that spread fastest across every share, every repost, every news segment: Police Chief's Son assaults Medal of Honor veteran at diner. It played on major news networks. For once, every outlet agreed on the same thing. The footage was undeniable. There was no angle that made Quentin look like anything other than exactly what he was. The comment sections exploded, thousands of them. Veterans who had served alongside men like Harlan. Parents who imagined their own fathers sitting on that curb. Strangers who had never been to Ridgemont, but felt the concrete under Harlan's knees as if it were their own. Veterans organizations issued formal statements within days. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, the Association of the United States Army. Every statement said some version of the same thing. This man bled for his country, and his country let him get dragged across a diner floor. The NAACP called for a full investigation, not just of Quentin, but of the entire Ridgemont Police Department. Because everyone watching that video had the same question. If Quentin felt comfortable doing this in public, on camera, in broad daylight, what had he done when nobody was watching? The State Attorney General, Sophia Lang, launched a formal investigation. Her office pulled every complaint filed against Quentin Hadley over the years. There were 11. 3 of them involved physical confrontation. All 3 victims were black. All 3 complaints had been filed with the Ridgemont Police Department, and all 3 had disappeared. No investigation, no follow-up, no paper trail. They simply stopped existing the moment they landed on Chief Victor Hadley's desk. One complaint was from a young college student who had been pulled over for a broken taillight. Quentin had made him lie face down on the road for an extended period, in the cold on wet asphalt. The young man filed a report. Nothing happened. Another was from a school teacher. Quentin had shown up at her door late in the evening over a noise complaint from a neighbor. There was no noise. Her house was silent. He searched her living room without permission. She filed a report. Nothing happened. The third was from a church deacon. Quentin had accused him of shoplifting at a gas station. The store camera showed the man had paid for everything. Quentin detained him for nearly an hour in the parking lot anyway. He filed a report. Nothing happened. 3 people, 3 reports, all buried, all black. The investigation expanded. Internal Affairs dove into Victor Hadley's department. What they found was a system built on silence. Racial profiling statistics that had never been reported to the state. Use of force incidents logged as resolved with no documentation. A department budget with unexplained expenses routed through a personal account. Over a decade of leadership. Over a decade of looking the other way. Over a decade of protecting his son and calling it police work. The trial began several weeks later at the Ridgemont County Courthouse. The courtroom was standing room only. News cameras waited outside. Reporters from multiple states. A sketch artist in the front row, because cameras weren't allowed inside. The prosecution played the diner footage first. Several minutes of raw video. No narration, no commentary, just the footage. Quentin grabbing Harlan's collar, the coffee mug shattering, Harlan's knees hitting the sidewalk, Quentin laughing, the selfie, the bronze star bouncing off the asphalt. The jury watched in silence. One woman in the back row pressed her hand over her mouth. A man in the front row closed his eyes during the selfie. Harlan Brooks took the stand. He wore a dark suit, no medals. He spoke the way he always spoke. Quiet, steady, precise. He described the morning, the coffee, the newspaper, the first words Quentin said. Every detail in order, without emotion. When the prosecutor asked how he felt when Quentin threw his bronze star on the ground, Harlan paused for a moment. That medal was given to me by a commanding officer who didn't make it home. I carried it for him, not for me. The courtroom remained silent for a long time after that. Quentin's defense attorney argued misunderstanding, poor judgment, a young man who had made a mistake. He used the word regret multiple times in his closing statement. The jury deliberated for several hours. Guilty on all counts: assault, unlawful detention, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The judge, Eleanor Shaw, with many years on the bench, sentenced Quentin Hadley to 3 years in federal prison with no parole for the first 18 months. Quentin stood motionless when the sentence was read. His mother sobbed in the gallery. His father wasn't there. Victor Hadley had been advised by his own attorney not to appear. Shane Porter's case was handled separately. He took a plea deal, 18 months in a minimum security facility, and permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. He would never carry a badge again. The civil suit came next. Attorney Julian Hayes, a civil rights attorney from Richmond with a long record of success in cases he believed in, represented Harlan. The suit named Quentin Hadley, Shane Porter, the Ridgemont Police Department, and the county. The jury awarded Harlan Brooks $2.8 million in damages. Then came Victor Hadley's turn. The state attorney general's investigation had built a case stretching back nearly a decade. Obstruction of justice, official misconduct, suppression of evidence, misuse of public funds. Victor Hadley resigned on a Thursday morning. He was indicted the following week. His long career ended not with a press conference or farewell speech, but with a mugshot taken in the same booking room where his son had been processed weeks earlier. The empty pedestal on Main Street, where the Confederate statue once stood. The city council voted unanimously to replace it with a monument to community service. They asked Harlan to speak at the dedication. He said a few words. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. Harlan and Lila still go to Clara's every weekend. Same time, same stool, same coffee. Black, no sugar, in the ceramic mug with the chip on the handle. Clara still pours it before he sits down. They still exchange the same simple greeting every week. Morning, Harlan. Morning, Clara. The jacket was repaired. Lila took it to a tailor the Monday after everything happened. The woman didn't charge her. She said she'd seen the video. It was the least she could do. Harlan wears it every weekend. Same hook by the door, third one from the left. The diner looks a little different now. Clara added a patio out back with several tables, red umbrellas, and string lights that glow warmly on summer evenings. Business doubled after the story broke. People drive in from surrounding areas just to eat at the place they saw on the news. There's a framed photograph hanging on the wall next to the register. Harlan and General Pierce, shaking hands in the parking lot. Clara took it herself. She had it printed on thick matte paper and placed it in a dark wooden frame. Nobody asks about it. Everybody knows. And next to the front door, just below the brass bell, there's a small bronze plaque with 4 words. Everyone belongs here. General Pierce visits once a year, always in the fall. He drives down from Washington in his personal car. No convoy, no aides, no stars on his shoulders, just an old friend visiting another old friend. They sit in the same booth by the window. Clara brings them the same thing. 2 plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits with coffee. No menus needed. They don't talk about that morning. They talk about the general's granddaughter, who just started college. They talk about Harlan's vegetable garden and the tomatoes that won't cooperate. They argue about fishing spots. Pierce thinks one river is better. Harlan swears by another. They never agree. They never stop arguing about it. When Pierce leaves, they shake hands in the parking lot, at the same spot where the salute happened. Neither of them mentions it. They don't have to. Quentin Hadley is in a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. He works in the laundry unit. He doesn't receive visitors. His commissary account gets no deposits. His mother stopped coming after a few months. She said the drive was too long. Everybody knew that wasn't the real reason. Shane Porter moved to another state after his release. He changed his last name. He works at an auto parts warehouse. He has never applied for another law enforcement position. He never will. Victor Hadley awaits trial. His attorneys have requested multiple delays. The state attorney general has denied everyone. The case is expected to go before a jury in the coming season. Over a decade of buried complaints. Over a decade of silence. All of it laid out on paper, waiting for 12 people to read. The Ridgemont Police Department now operates under a federal consent decree. Mandatory bias training, a civilian oversight board, body cameras that cannot be turned off during any interaction with the public. Every complaint gets logged, tracked, and reviewed by an independent monitor. It's not perfect, no system is, but it's not what it was. Lydia Reed, the woman who filmed the video, was offered money by several media companies for exclusive rights. She turned them all down. She said the video didn't belong to her. It belonged to everyone who had ever been treated like Harlan and didn't have a general who picked up the phone. And that's the thing. Harlan's power was never the medal, never the phone call, never the general with the black SUVs. It was that he never broke. He sat on that curb with his palms bleeding and his dignity completely intact. You can't take something from a man who refuses to let go of it. This story is fiction, but imagine it's your grandfather on that curb, his medal in the dirt, a dozen people just watching. What would you do? Stand up or look at your plate? If this one moved you, like, share, subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments.